Hello, and welcome to the New York State Archives webinar on the Social Government Records Management Improvement Fund, LGRMIF. This is the first of 6 webinars dealing with the LGRMIF. I am Lorraine Hill, Regional Advisory Officer for the State Archives Metro Long Island region. My co-presenter today is my colleague, Dennis Meadows, Director of Government Records Services of the New York State Archives. This webinar will provide an introduction to the LGRMIF grants program and provide a foundation for our other LGRMIF grant-related webinars, which we encourage you to view. This webinar will not address specific questions in the LGRMIF RFP, also referred to as the Grant Application Guidelines. We strongly recommend that you review the current guidelines when they become available. Additionally, we recommend that you consult with your State Archives Regional Advisory Officer and, of course, view the pertinent webinars. Today, we will introduce the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund, LGRMIF. We will discuss the 2 eligibility requirements which must be met by local governments in order to apply for a grant. Then we will explore the 3 different types of grants which are available to eligible local governments. Next, we will provide an overview of the 5 different grant application project categories and the eligible activities under each. Finally, we will suggest some next steps for you to take as you develop your grant application and your proposed projects. The LGRMIF Grants Program was created over 30 years ago to provide funds to help local governments establish records management programs, or to develop new components of an existing records management program. It is derived from fees collected by county clerks and the New York City Registrar for the recording of select documents and for the assignment by county clerks of index numbers for certain court cases. The amount collected varies from year to year. As a result, the amount that is available for grants vary from year to year. Generally, we don't know how much money will be available until just before the annual grant application review. Also, the amount requested each year generally exceeds that which is available. It is a competitive program. Therefore, grants are awarded on the merits of the applications as submitted. As a result, only the highest scoring applications are recommended for funding, and many worthwhile applications cannot be recommended for funding. Since the inception of the LGRMIF, the State Archives has awarded over 10,000 grants, totaling over $230 million to over 50% of the state's 4,300 plus local governments. An untold number of additional local governments have improved the management of their records by their participation in cooperative projects and shared services projects. The LGRMIF does not support local government records management programs indefinitely. Local governments are expected to assume primary responsibility for ongoing support of their records management programs and grant-funded initiatives. The LGRMIF, though, will support program enhancements and expansion. Each year, there are changes to the LGRMIF grants program. Some years, there may be major changes, and other years, the changes are minor and few in number. These are outlined in the grant application guidelines. It is important, therefore, that each applicant review the guidelines and become familiar with the changes. Now, in order to be eligible, applicants must be local governments. According to the Local Governments Records Law, Article 57A of the Arts and Cultural Affairs Law, a local government means any county, city, town, village, school district, Board of Cooperative Educational Services like BOCES, district corporation, public benefit corporation, public corporation, or other government created under state law that is not a State Department, division, board, bureau, commission, or other agency heretofore or hereafter established by law. Applicants must also have appointed a records management officer. According to Article 57A, in towns, the town clerk shall be the records management officer. In fire districts, the district secretary shall be the records management officer. In villages, the village clerk shall be the records management officer. In other units of government, the chief executive official shall designate a local officer to be the records management officer, subject to the approval of the governing body. In addition, applicants must have adopted the State Archives Records Retention and Disposition Schedule, LGS-1. Please note, applicants must have appointed the RMO and adopted the Schedule LGS-1 by the application deadline as stated in the application guidelines. Now, there are some exceptions to the eligibility requirements. These exceptions are entities of the City of New York and housing authorities. Housing authorities are not required by law to have an RMO or to adopt Schedule LGS-1. New York City mayoral agencies are eligible and must apply through the New York City Department of Records and Information Services, also known as DORIS. By law, the City of New York can receive up to $1 million in local government funds each year from the LGRMIF program. Individual agencies may apply for individual grants and may request and receive up to $75,000. Alternatively, two or more agencies may band together to apply for a shared services grant. New York City agencies apply through New York City Department of Records and Information Services, aka DORIS. As a result, there are additional steps that agencies must complete in order for DORIS to submit their applications by the application deadline. For information and assistance with additional requirements specific to New York City agencies, contact DORIS at 212-788-7513 or grants@records.nyc.gov. The person to request is Eleanor Prince. Volunteer fire companies and voluntary ambulance companies are also eligible to apply or to participate in a shared services application. These are not-for-profit entities, not local governments under the Local Government Records Law, and are not subject to the previously mentioned eligibility requirements regarding appointing an RMO and adopting the LGS-1 schedule. In fact, they are not even covered by the Schedule LGS-1. Finally, it is important to note that the State Archives will not forward an application for review if the has not submitted all final reports from any previous awarded LGRMIF grant. So now I will turn it over to my co-presenter, Dennis, to discuss the types of grants.
Thanks, Lorraine. There are three types of grants for you to apply for. There are shared services, individual grants, and disaster recovery grants. Let's take a look at each. Shared service grants may request and receive up to $150,000. Shared service grants are a priority for funding, and the State Archives will earmark a to-be-determined amount of grant funds to support shared service projects each year. In recent years, that amount has fluctuated between $1 and $2 million. Shared services grants are designed to provide funding for sustainable projects that will benefit two or more local governments. There's no limit on how many participant local governments you may have, but you want to keep it manageable. There's a separate set of shared service application requirements outlined in the LGRMIF grant application guidelines. And there's also a separate shared service webinar. So if you're thinking of a shared services grant, you'll want to look at those requirements in the grant guidelines, and you want to make sure to watch the shared services webinar. Individual grants, you may request and receive up to $75,000. You don't have to ask for $75,000. In fact, you want to make sure to ask for only what you need. So you can request as little as you need, but no more than $75,000. Individual grants, as the name suggests, involves one local government applicant or one New York City agency. Individual applicants can involve records from multiple local government offices, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Disaster recovery grants are the third type of grants. All local governments, except New York City municipal agencies, are eligible to apply for a disaster recovery grant. There is no application deadline for disaster recovery grants, as disasters generally occur suddenly and unexpectedly, not according to a prescribed timetable. Disaster recovery grant applications must be submitted, though, within 30 days of the disaster, unless extenuating circumstances preclude this. So if you experience a disaster that involves records, you're going to want to make sure to reach out to your regional advisory officer as soon as possible. Something to keep in mind, though, is that disaster recovery grants must involve permanent and/or vital records, and that they need to be imperiled by the disaster. Disaster recovery grants may request and receive up to $20,000. Again, you don't have to ask for $20,000. You'll ask for whatever you determine you need to address the disaster.
Thank you, Dennis. So what project category should you use as a local government? There are 5 different grant application categories. When completing your application in the State Archives e-grant system, you will need to select one category on the application page. You may find, though, that your application and proposed project covers multiple categories. In such instances, you would select a category which covers the bulk of your proposed project's activities. The records management problem that you identify and choose to address should guide your grant project selection. It is critically important that you read the grant application guidelines particularly the activities and requirements under each grant project category. The following project category slides provide an overview of eligible activities under each project category. The first project category that we will look at is disaster management. By definition, disaster management projects are projects to develop, implement, and test a set of policies, procedures, and practices that are undertaken before a records disaster occurs, and should outline what should happen when it occurs and after it occurs. Activities for this category include developing a disaster and business recovery plan for a local government's archival and vital records, or for a shared services consortium's archival or vital records, and testing and implementing the recommendations of said disaster business recovery plan. Please note that projects under this category must address both hard copy and electronic record systems. Our next project category is inactive records. A large number of applications are submitted for this category. By definition, this category encompasses projects to plan, develop, or improve the management of records during the inactive phase of their life cycle. Activities include a comprehensive inventory of all government records or an inventory focused on the records of one or more departments. It can also include an inventory focused on a specific record format. For example, you may want to inventory all your maps and plans, or inventory your email, or some other electronic records. The purpose of this category is to propose projects to inventory, organize, and enhance the accessibility of inactive records. Projects may include hiring a consultant to develop a strategy, help formalize policies and procedures, and map the required technology infrastructure for managing inactive electronic records. This category can also address projects to improve an inactive record storage facility. Funding is available to purchase and install intruder alarm systems, fire detection systems, fire suppression systems, water detectors, environmental monitoring equipment, and stationary or mobile shelving for inactive record storage facilities. You can also choose to do a record survey, which collects information on records stored in a local government. Though it is not as comprehensive as a records inventory, it is something that you can do so that you can get an idea of the type of records the local government is holding. It is important to note all records inventory and survey projects must involve the development of a records management needs assessment and a records management program plan that addresses the short and long-term goals for the records. Our next project category is historical records. By definition, these are projects to address historical records, also known as archival records, and are records that are deemed worthy of permanent preservation and special care because of the important information they contain. These are records identified in the Schedule LGS-1 as having a permanent retention period or potential historical importance. Activities this category will address are assessing the current status of archival activities in order to identify needs, develop plans, write policies and procedures, and recommend future activities for a formal historical records program. It will also address improving access by arranging, rehousing, and describing historical records. It may require hiring a professional conservator to survey the preservation needs, to develop a plan to address those needs, or to apply conservation treatment. And it may also require developing websites, brochures, exhibits, walking tours, or other products that local government records may need or may be used. Finally, it may require developing or implementing systems and processes to ingest electronic records into an archival records management system. It is important to note also that educational activities can also be included in this category, such as preparing document-based instructional materials for classroom use, including a collection of documents related to a particular topic, historical background information about the topic, and learning activities that incorporate the documents into classroom instruction. Also, other activities include developing programs to train teachers to use local government records as teaching tools in the classroom. Our next category is files management. By definition, files management is the systematic control of active files, preferably beginning at the point when the files are created. If files are managed well when they are active, managing them as inactive files will be easier. Applications under this category are limited to paper records only. Projects under this category may involve reorganizing or centralizing paper files, implementing file classification systems and taxonomies, developing written policies and procedures, and training staff, and may involve implementation of a new filing system, which may include the purchase of specialized filing supplies, such as NTAB or color-coded file folders, and equipment such as lateral or locking files. Finally, our last category is document conversion and access. Like the inactive records, we receive a high volume of grant applications in this category. By definition, these are projects to convert records to another format through the use of microfilming or imaging, or a combination of these, and projects to implement electronic content management systems, electronic document management systems, electronic record systems. So for simplicity's sake, we will refer to them as ECMS or electronic content management systems. Activities in this category may deal with converting paper records to microfilm, or digital images, or producing a microfilm master or preservation image and digital use image. It may also deal with converting microfilm records to digital images, or copying digital images or information to microfilm. It can also address the deterioration of acid-base or nitrite microfilm, or may improve access to microfilm or scanned images through manual indexing, converting images to electronic text, implementing full text searching software, or a combination of solutions. In addition, it may address implementing an ECMS to improve both access to the records and management of the records over their life cycle, as well as developing policies and procedures covering electronic records management. It can also include projects to enhance to a government's records via the internet, email projects, or projects to reorganize or centralize electronic files, implement file classification systems and taxonomies, and developing written policies and procedures for these records. Please note, record systems application projects that do not manage records as their primary purpose are not eligible for funding.
Thanks, Lorraine. Maybe you have multiple projects in mind, or maybe you have multiple departments who are interested in applying for a grant. If so, you may be wondering how many applications you can submit. Applicants can apply for only one individual grant or one shared services grant, and that's as either lead applicant or a participant. Applicants can apply for a second grant if it is for disaster management project. In this case, the maximum award for disaster management as a second grant is $10,000. If disaster management is the only project you're applying for, you may request up to the maximum amount for either an individual grant or a shared services grant. A county may submit a second application if it is for the county's community college and its records. In this case, the application would be submitted via the county and via the county's records management officer. So the records management officer would be the one with the user account. Under no circumstances can a local government apply for 3 competitive grants. There are a number of steps that the State Archives recommends you take prior to submitting your application. It doesn't really matter what order you complete these in, but completion of these steps will facilitate development and submission of your application. It will increase your chances of success, and it may also reduce or eliminate a few headaches. The first thing is make sure that you have an eGrants user account. Having an eGrant user account is a prerequisite to applying online because you need that to access the eGrant system. If you are not registered with the eGrant system, see the grant application guidelines or the eGrant webinar for instructions. To request a new user account, you must register within the time frame specified in the grant application guidelines. Only the RMO will be supplied with a user account. If you are the RMO and you don't know whether or not you have an account, you'll want to email the State Archives Grants Administration Unit at archgrants@nysed.gov. You'll want to identify your records management problem and needs, and you'll want to collect data to support the argument that it needs to be addressed. Talk with your coworkers and make sure all departments in your local government are considered for grant funding. And talk to your regional advisory officer and maybe other archive staff. You'll find a directory of RAOs on the State Archives website. Then you'll want to review the grant application guidelines. The grant application guidelines will have a brief instruction on using the eGrants system, but we have a separate webinar that will give you much more information on that. The guidelines will also contain information on potential projects and eligible and ineligible expenditures. The guidelines will be available as an accessible PDF on our website for you to download. And make sure that you know the changes for the grants. Each year there are a handful of changes, some major, some minor, and you'll want to make sure that you're familiar with them. You'll also want to check your local government FEDREF information. I know you're wondering, what is FEDREF? Well, FEDREF is the State Education Department's authority file on its customers. It feeds your local government's information into the eGrant system. Well, why should you check on that? Well, you want to make sure that the FEDREF information that the eGrant system uses to populate your application sheet and your project budget is both current and accurate. You'll also want to look at our other webinars. And as I've mentioned previously, and I'll mention again, if you have questions about the eGrant system or user accounts, contact the State Archives Grants Administration Unit at archgrants@nysed.gov. So Lorraine mentioned that we have a series of webinars dealing with the LGRMIF. So here are the remainder ones. There's number 2 is shared service. 3 is using the eGrant system. Number 4 is writing the grant narrative. Number 5 is application forms and tips. And number 6 is the MWBE program. The LGRIMF is required to comply with the State of New York and the State Education Department's MWBE goals. That means that every grant application in excess of $25,000 must make plans for meeting the goal of 30%. So this will be a very important webinar for you to examine at some point. Final reminder, again, contact your State Archives Regional Advisory Officer. There's a directory on our website. They will be able to answer a lot of questions to help you develop your application and make it more clear and competitive. And contact the State Archives Grants Unit with any questions about the eGrant system and the user accounts. There are 3 people here in Albany who are monitoring that account, so chances are you're going to get a response fairly promptly. Thank you for watching, and good luck.